Okay, hi everybody. We had told you that we were going to be on summer vacation, the Ozzy and Keats podcast, but then things happened as things can happen in the world. And so it is the best possible Ozzy and Keats podcast because it does not involve Ozzy. John Keating with you. I'm joined by the legendary voice of the Red Wings, Ken Daniels, and Max Bultman, who does such a terrific job of covering the Red Wings for The Athletic. On the heels of the announcement this morning that Steve Yzerman is stepping away from his role as executive vice president and general manager of the Red Wings to become a senior advisor after 7 years at the helm. Kenny, I'll start with you. Your reaction to this morning's news was what?
Well, I was shocked. I thought, if things didn't go well this year, and meaning, it's going to be tough, obviously, in the division they're in to make a lot of headway. But I thought if things didn't go well or the Larkin situation, then maybe down the road something happens. I was first hearing it. I was shocked that it happened today. But then again, this didn't just happen today. This must have happened internally over the last couple of weeks. And they were thinking about it. But you had free agency, you had the draft, you had to get through that. And then it happens today. So surprised. I thought maybe in a year or so, but still surprised that it happened today.
Max, what was your shock level?
Very high. Yeah. I mean, I thought that there was a chance this could happen in April after the way the season ended, the way it did, and you thought, maybe they could justify a change or use a change. And when it got through that phase, that initial phase of the offseason, and nothing happened, I certainly was expecting to proceed as business as usual going forward here. And to Ken's point, like you never know what's going to happen in the future. Certainly, they're in a very difficult spot as a franchise, and I don't think you can say this is like a out of nowhere move. It's just really the timing of it. In mid-July, they just did their draft, they just did free agency, and they did it all with Steve Yzerman at the helm. I would not have expected a move between that and the start of the season. That is my biggest surprise, is the timing.
So why do you think it happened now after free agency and after the draft, Max?
I don't know, and that's I think one of the big questions I have. I don't know if or when we will get to speak to any of the decision makers or stakeholders involved here to find out that answer. But that's, I think, one of the most interesting things about it. I think as this offseason is wore on, we knew from, I think, early June is when the Dylan Larkin trade request broke, that this was going to be a really difficult offseason now for the Red Wings, and so much of it kind of remains ahead. And I don't know if that means that they decided someone else was going to be the one to handle that. I don't really even know which side initiated this. And so that, I think, is where a lot of the questions stem as we sit here today on Wednesday. And I don't know when we will get those answers.
Kenny, how
Yeah.
much? Go ahead, Kenny.
No, just so many questions. And, I hearken back to the Pat Verbeek situation, who worked under Steve Yzerman, hard on contracts, Leo Carlson, the offer sheet comes in, millions more than he wanted to spend. The Red Wings have to get Simon Edvinsson done. If history is an indication of the future, they went through with Moritz Seider and Lucas Raymond into September. The Dylan Larkin contract, that wasn't easy. And to those who sign contracts, you sign the contract. Well, you're happy when you signed the contract, and you can't complain about the contract after. But how things were done, I think, and then see what happened in Anaheim with Pat Verbeek, and maybe all this comes in, the Dylan Larkin situation, the tense feeling. How do you start the season with that? So all of that comes in weighing off what Max said.
Well, and I was going to ask you, how much do you think the Dylan Larkin situation has led to Steve Yzerman stepping away or being asked to step away? Kenny, if you can touch upon that.
I think there's many at fault here. I would think from both sides, and I think sure enough from Steve's side, it's unfortunate that it got out, and even from Dylan's side, that'll be the interesting question that someday, if that ever comes out, is who leaked this out, because it didn't behoove Steve Yzerman to do so for sure, and I don't know whether how much wasn't happening that it got nudged along, but once one GM knows and someone else knows, as Max knows, this stuff leaks out, and then the Larkin issue became a huge issue. He was the captain of this team, and there's blame to go around, and you can be on the Larkin side, you can be on the Yzerman side, and those who are on the Larkin side are probably reveling in the fact that Steve's not there anymore, but there's another side too, Max. It's pretty split, I would think.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the interesting ripples. I mean, there's a ton of what comes next questions that I'm sure we're going to get to in this episode. But one of them for me is, what does this mean for Dylan, and does it change his feelings on the situation? The ripple to that is, would that matter to fans? Would that matter to the organization? I mean, if Dylan did have a change of heart, would fans be willing to accept that? And I think that's a really interesting factor in all this too. But to your point, John, with the initial question is like, I think that request changed so much. I wrote it on that day. This changes everything for the franchise. I think I meant that more in terms of the big picture direction of the team, but certainly you can narrow that down from 10,000 feet into something like this. And does it change everything on the day to day? It certainly changed how they had to operate in the intervening period between, I think that was like June 3rd or 4th to today as we sit here in the last 5, 6 weeks, right? Like everything has had to be colored by that situation. And I would certainly not think this decision exempt from that reality.
Well, you get points, first of all, for working Ripple twice into a sentence into an Ozzy
I
and
was going to
Keats
say,
podcast. I mean, it's hashtag Ripple since we started this damn thing, and there's Max Bultman dropping a couple of ripples in. God bless you.
love
God
it,
bless you for
love
doing
it,
that. It'll give us
love it.
something to smile about on a rather tense day. All right, so let's say that another general manager comes in, and now he's got to work with the situation at hand. Max, what are the odds that Dylan Larkin is still here as a Red Wing? And can Dylan Larkin be the captain of the Red Wings from that point forward?
You're saying is still here when the new general manager gets here?
Correct. Yeah.
I think at this point you have to wait for the new general manager to get here. I don't think that you can make a trade as seismic as this without the guy who's going to be in charge of what he inherits being the one to make it, right? Like I think now that this is out and now that this has been announced, I mean, I understand he's going to handle the day-to-day operations. There are things that could come up that he would have to handle, right? If another team is making trade offers, though, I think you're ideally wanting to say, well, hey, wait until the next guy's in here to decide because he's the one who's going to have to, kind of live with the results. So that's the first answer to the question. I already forgot the second part of the question.
Well, whether Dylan Larkin could still be the captain of the Red Wings, so should he still be a member of the team?
I just think it's hard. It's hard to go back into the locker room and have this been out there and expect to go in there and have everything just proceed as it was. It's just not the reality. I mean, if I certainly think it's a possibility that he's still in that locker room, but I think it's hard to go into that situation and just still be the C. It's not that I think that the players will necessarily they're going to understand where he's coming from, I think, to some extent, right? Like these guys all are more similar to each other than they are to the people outside the locker room. And I think, they'll all have had experiences and Dylan's been in together and Dylan's been in there longer than any of them. And so I'm sure that there is a level of understanding for it, but I don't know whether it's the coaching staff, whether it's the management group, whatever it might be. I don't know how you can continue on as status quo from where things are at. Maybe I'm off base on that, Ken, but that's my instinct.
I can't see Dylan Larkin being captain of this team. And you can go a year without a captain. I think that could happen. And whether your next captain is Moritz Seider or it's Alex DeBrincat, who I think would be terrific if he resigns. But that's another question for the new guy who comes in, who has to get Simon Edvinsson done. We've seen what the cost of not getting young players signed up long term is, and to do it quickly. And I think that has to be done. And don't forget, Steve, he's still there. He's still a consultant, whatever that is, or if someone comes in as president and working with him, and maybe a name we may or may not be familiar with comes in as president, and then he grooms a general manager. I think the search is going to be far and wide. And again, it just didn't happen on this day. It's been probably internally for a few weeks now. But in my mind, Dylan Larkin isn't captain, and I think they might be best off just going without one for a year till things settle.
All right, what are the odds that Dylan Larkin is still a Red Wing in the fall, Max?
I think the big question to that is how fast does this search wrap up? I mean,
Yeah, right.
camp is in 2
Because
months, right?
the clock is ticking on all of this stuff right now.
That's right. And when one thing leads into another, I mean, if you can make this hire in the next month, let's say, that gives you a month before training camp. I think that's a good amount of time for a new GM to come in, survey the landscape, survey the market, touch base with, Larkin and see where he's at. And then you make some decisions. I mean, like, there's different scenarios here, right? One is a new GM comes in and Larkin says, actually, I'd like to stay. And then the GM has to decide, is that viable? Another situation is, and granted, when we talked about that, can Dylan Larkin be the captain next year? That's assuming that this trade request is still out there. The question I don't know, if he rescinds the request, what happens? Zach Werenski, rescinds that
Sure.
request in Columbus, right?
Sure.
So you can't. I don't
Yeah,
think you can have the C with an active trade request. I don't know if that changes if it was rescinded. But the question
it
to me is, would the fans accept that? I don't know if the fans would accept it.
That's the question. I mean, because whether, I mean, and it doesn't matter because the fans are what the fans are really in this regard. But, we have heard so much reaction to the request for the trade from the fan base. What might the fan base reaction be if Dylan Larkin is a Red Wing, Kenny?
That is $1 million, in this day and
Yeah.
age, $1 billion question. There will be, I still think there's more negativity his way than there is Steve Yzerman's. And I don't know how much. I wouldn't want to put a percentage on it. I just don't see, even if the trade request is rescinded, you still didn't want to be a Red Wing when you are from this hometown. Now, that could be mitigating factors with Steve or anything else or what happened behind the scenes, and we're not privy to that. I would love to see, if Dylan Larkin could make things work, because the alternative is I don't know what you're going to get for him in some time, and it's even further down the
Right.
road. I just think he's better off for all just to let this ride and don't be a captain if he stays. And I'm not sure. Listen, he's tight with Patrick Kane. There's going to be some players in that room who won't be happy that he wanted to move, but players are players and do what's best for you. And some are tight and they'll say, okay, do what you need to do. And some won't be. But I think even if that room is split a little bit, let the C thing dissipate and not add to that. And by the way, speaking of Patrick Kane, because Chris Chelios said on the Score in Chicago that Patrick Kane has narrowed it down to either Chicago or Buffalo. And Chelio said, because I spoke to him. So it's been pretty much radio silent, but Chelly, when Kane says something, but who knows? Does this whole situation, he was dealing with Steve Yzerman on contract, who's still going through that. He's close with Dylan Larkin. Does that change where Patrick Kane goes?
Well, and yeah, it's not just Larkin, and the conversation is all about Steve Yzerman, and we got to get back to that at some point. But there's all this interconnection between Patrick Kane and then Alex DeBrincat, who's approaching the end of his contract, and whether and what you're going to have to sort of rebuild around. Max, wouldn't that be the case, that how much you're going to tear it down under a new general manager, if in fact that's the case?
I think they should have done it regardless of who the general manager was. I think that the path was too narrow to do any better than, let's be optimistic and let's say fifth. I think the path was too narrow to do anything besides fifth for the next year or two, with how strong the Florida Panthers are, with how strong the Tampa Bay Lightning continue to be, with how good the Montreal Canadiens have become. Even the Buffalo Sabres, they didn't have the best offseason. The prospects that they brought up in the playoffs, who are 21, 22 years old, those kids are going to continue to get better. I think they're going to be a tough team to knock off. I find it hard to see a path for the Red Wings to be better than those four teams, which means you're fighting for the second wild card spot, as close to your best case scenario, barring some big injuries, which is always possible in our game. But it was going to be a narrow path, and I think they had to kind of reset anyway. And I think if the great silver lining of this situation, and I don't think that a franchise icon having an unsuccessful tenure as a general manager is a good thing at all. But if you're going to draw a silver lining from it, it's that a new person is going to walk in. They're going to get whatever patience you get from making a leadership change,
Sure.
and it's going to buy them a little bit of time and a little bit of, okay, let's give this guy a chance. And the situation they're inheriting is a better one than Steve Yzerman inherited 7 years ago. And I think when you look at the prospect cupboard, when you look at the number of young players that are already in the lineup, go back to 2019. It was Dylan Larkin, Anthony Mantha, Tyler Bertuzzi, Philip Hronik. And then what else, right? You had the chance of Philip Zadina, the chance of Michael Rasmussen. I believe Svechnikov and Cholowski were still around, but it was already not trending great at that point, right? Now you compare that to Moritz Seider, Lucas Raymond, Simon Edvinsson. Whatever you think of Marco Kasper and Nate Danielson and Emmett Finney, they're better than what Detroit had in 2019, and there's more of them, and there's more on the way. There's Brandt Nygaard, there's Bear, and I haven't even mentioned Alex DeBrincat's name yet because there is the uncertainty. But oh, by the way, you might have an 85-point guy who's one of the 5 best players at his position that you can keep too. So I think you have to reset, and I don't think it's going to be as hard of a rebuild as it was 7 years ago because of where the organization now stands today. And I think a new GM gets more leeway to make the moves that need to be made, the hard moves that need to be made, and the hard decisions that need to probably be made, in my opinion, to take it on the chin for another year and just accept that. And go through it. And you're trying to get better. I'm not saying accept mediocrity, but I'm saying accept that this is what's best for the franchise. And then a guy who would miss the playoffs 7 years in a row in Steve Yzerman. I don't think Yzerman can sell that. I think a new GM can sell that.
And a new GM may be able to to sell Dylan Larkin and massage that coming back. And I
Yes.
promised to the fans and to Dylan, we're going to take this path. So let's wait and see. And let's hope we can all move forward. And, I think a week into the season, and the Red Wings are opening up, October 2nd at home against the New York Rangers, their first home game. And let's say Dylan Larkin is still in uniform and gets the overtime winner that night. I think a lot will be forgiven, because that's how fans are pretty quickly. You don't forget, but sometimes you forgive just a little bit.
Sergei Fedorov just got, more accomplished more, right? He's got the cups. We just saw Sergei Fedorov get standing O and get his number retired. There were extremely hard feelings around his departure, and he actually left, right? He did an offer sheet before that and came back, and it was for a time. And I get there's different levels of team success there that certainly impacts and colors everything. But yeah, you're right. Like, I think there's this whole new slate of, I called it a narrow road a second ago. I think the number of potential paths is greater, and all of them are wider paths now than they were 24 hours ago.
Is there a name that you can think of who might be a possible candidate to be the next general manager of the Red Wings? And are Lidstrom or Draper or Sean Horkoff possibilities, Max?
I give you like 10 names that I could think of. It's basically all I've been doing all day is thinking of names. So Sean Horkoff, I think is
who you got? Throw some at us.
I think Sean Horkoff is one of the most obvious ones. He just was the manager of the Grand Rapids team that was off to such a historic start. Chris Draper has been an AGM, and I think you probably have to have, the conversation there too. Those guys are technically kind of parallel, but Horkoff is the one who has run a team before in the Griffins, right? I think of guys who have ties to the organization, I think you got to at least make a call to Jim Nill and see what the situation is there. He's one of the best general managers in the National Hockey League today. He came up through the Red Wings. You owe it to yourself to make a call. I don't know. You have to do some finagling. You'd have to, with the title, in order to have permission to talk to him. You still might not get it, but if you offer the title of president, maybe that can at least be kind of the workaround for how you get to talk to someone else's GM. Another guy with ties to the organization, Ryan Martin, who was an AGM here for a long time. Now he's with the New York Rangers. And I wonder about Brendan Shanahan with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I know that there's, the current is so built, the current structure is so built around a lot of guys from that era of Red Wings. And I don't know if you can kind of sell that you're going from one to another, but it's a name that I think has merit. And then I also think about a lot of, did you have something, Ken?
No, go ahead.
Yeah.
I love listening to you as much as John does. Go ahead.
Well, there's two other kind of types of candidate that I think are really interesting out there. And those are people who have data backgrounds. I look at the Tigers, and the Tigers have really invested in analytics and biomechanics under Scott Harris. And we know that the Illiches have been on board with that. Would they take a similar direction for their hockey team? And I'm not going to tell you I know every analytics guy around the NHL. I mean, I think, again, speaking of current GMs, the Eric Tulsky in Carolina, we know how Tom Dundon runs that ship. I think you owe it to yourself to make the call and see if it's possible with the right amount of money, with the right title, to get to talk to him. I think you should try to talk to Sam Ventura in Buffalo, who had been a part of the Pittsburgh Penguins organization previously. Brett Peterson in Florida. There's kind of former agent names out there. That's a very in vogue thing. Not names out there, I should say, agent conversation out there that's a very in vogue thing in the league. Kent Hughes was a former agent. Bill Zito was a former agent. Both of them had tremendous success. And then I think you just look at kind of some of the old standby names, right? I mean, there are hockey lifer names out there that are not out there, but hockey lifer names on the market that could you talk to Doug Armstrong? Could you talk to Tom Fitzgerald, right? Like guys like this who have some experience, and maybe could you pair a guy like that, Ken? Like if you wanted to have a little more modern analytics flavored, could you pair a guy like Sam Ventura with a guy like Doug Armstrong or Tom Fitzgerald or something like that? That's kind of the way my mind's going right now.
I like the way your mind goes. And, and if you say money talks, it's not a lot of money to probably get more than what Eric Tulsky's making now in Carolina. So, but I can't imagine Tom Dundon letting him escape, just like Brindamore is one of the lowest paid head coaches probably, and he'd probably be the highest paid coach at $7 million a year if he ever became a free agent, which I don't know what Tom Dundon would do there. But I'm with you on a guy like Doug Armstrong. Step down from St. Louis and Hockey Canada and all the rest. But Doug Armstrong's a very good name. And would there ever be a Doug Armstrong and a Brendan Shanahan, or Armstrong coming in with somebody just beneath him? I don't know how the Shanny dynamic would go. I mean, Steve's still here. I'm not sure about that one either. But I thought Shanahan might end up in Nashville, and he did not. But I would think he wants to get back in for sure. But to me, all those names you said many different paths to go, and Doug Armstrong was the one, along with Jim Nell, who popped into my head first.
Evan Gold in Boston, another one that I think could be interesting too, right? And it's what's interesting about the timing. I know I've hammered this a bunch, but if you did this in April, you'd have had Sonny Meta available to you.
Yeah.
Could you have gotten in on Chris McFarland before the Nashville Predators did? Like, waiting until July means the Red Wings are basically making the last general manager hire of this cycle.
Well,
And one more thing, John, and if it's a name you haven't heard of, you didn't hear of Eric Tulsky, who, 15 years ago, and he was doing what Prashant Iyer is doing, right? And just
Yep.
analytics and things like that. So just because you don't know the name, and Pat Brisson, who represents half the Red Wing dressing room, just go on and be general manager. So a lot of the agents who knew, really, you knew Bill Zito was an agent at the time, but before he started with Columbus, we didn't know, and then goes and wins cups in Florida. So don't just go because, for Red Wing fans who don't know a name, there's a search going on which will make sense in the end.
Okay, a couple of things as we wrap up our emergency podcast, and I'm terrifically thankful to Ken Daniels and Max Bultman for joining us. You're still, whoever that person is still going to be under special advisor Steve Yzerman. How tricky can that be, Max?
I would push back on that. Are they going to be under him? I don't know. I don't necessarily read it that way. I read it as Steve Yzerman is a special advisor, a senior advisor to Chris Ilitch. And I read in that press release, they're looking for a new head of hockey operations.
Okay.
And so I read that as the person who comes in has autonomy. And I could be wrong about that, but that's the way I read the press release, is that they're looking for a guy to run the department.
I guess it's just that Steve is still around. I guess
he's got a presence.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I get you. I mean, as
presence,
long
yeah.
as he's in the picture, there's going to be people looking to him. I do agree with that, and that is an interesting dynamic they'll have to stick handle. But that's why I think that doing it as senior advisor to Chris Ilitch and not like hockey and vice president and hockey operations advisor is a big distinction there, at least in how I read it.
Yeah, and remember on April 19th of 19, when Steve took over, Ken Holland was in a similar position and lasted for a week or so, and then he was gone.
That's
so, that works too.
All right, last thing. Have we gotten a Mickey Redmond reaction to all this, Kenny?
Yeah, he was before we were talking to Max with a wow, and then right to Mickey, and he was shocked. Yeah, he was as surprised as we all were, and certainly the timing and the great unknown, and we all respect Steve very much. It just something had to happen here because it just wasn't working. But we're all surprised.
All right, Max, go back to work. Kenny, go back to your golf game. We thank everybody for watching and listening. We thank Max for getting two ripples into the conversation, and thanks to our terrific team at Podcast Nation in Troy for throwing this together at the last minute. We also thank Chris Osgood for staying the hell away from this conversation, because this was thoughtful, and we know this about Ozzy: he is never ever thoughtful. All right, boys, thanks. For those guys, I'm John Keating. Thanks for watching and listening on Ozzy and Keats. We'll see you soon when Ozzy returns from his summer vacation.
Ozzy and Keats is produced by Zachary Davis and Bill McAllister and proudly distributed by Podcast Nation in Troy, Michigan.